Hello students, in our last lecture we discussed about what is load, what is stress, what is strain. We also discussed about the relationship between stress and strain. We discussed about the plotting of stress strain diagram using tensile testing machine. So that was the last part that we covered in our lecture. I'm going to briefly again repeat that part of tensile testing machine. So you can see that stress strain diagram here, and this is a plot for a ductile material. And what is a ductile material? A ductile material is the one which can be drawn into wire by the application of tension, so which can easily get converted into wire. So they give appreciable deformation without actually failure. The salient point of this stress strain diagram is proportional point, elastic point, yield point, ultimate point, and the fracture point that we have already discussed in our last lecture. How have we plotted this graph? We used a specimen which is shown over here, which is of standard length, and it has got knurling at its both the ends so that it can be easily held in the tensile testing machine jaws. And with the help of tensile testing machine, we apply a tensile load on this, let's say of P magnitude. So we are pulling its both end, and we are able to measure the applied load and also able to measure the change in the length of the specimen, and we are watching the change in the length in this area, which is called as the gauge length. Now when this component is subjected to tension load, we measure for a given amount of load what is the deformation, and if we divide the area of the component the load with the area of the component, we will get the value of stress, and if you divide the deformation with the original length, we will get the strain. So this is the way we are plotting this graph. We will find that initially it is a straight line up to the point P, then it start getting into non-straight portion, and it reaches to point E, which is elastic point, which is the full recovery point. So if you remove the load up till E, you will follow the straight line and get back again to the origin here without any having residual deformation. Beyond point E, there will be a plastic deformation, so there will be a permanent set and there will be residual strain. Point Y represents a point of appreciable deformation without further increase in load. So from point Y to Y dash, you can see there is a deformation while the load is not being increased. In fact, it is shown that the load is decreasing. From point Y dash, again strain hardening took place, so that's why you need to again increase the amount of load in order to get the deformation. So from point Y dash to U, there is a continuous increase in the amount of stresses. U is the point which is for the maximum stress, and after U there is a decrease in the stress value, and the component finally fails at point F. Now the question arises, because the stresses corresponding to point F has already reached at this point here, why the component has not failed here? This is because, and it seems like that the fracture stresses are lower than the value of ultimate stress. This is true if you use the original area in order to plot the stress value, but if you take the actual area, you will find that beyond point U there is a necking in the component, so there is a local reduction in the area. So from the middle somewhere there is a large reduction in area which is called as necking. So this is called as necking, and while we are plotting the stress based on the original area which we measured before the start of experiment, so therefore the F appears to be lower than U. But if you take the actual area, you will find that the reduced area will be there, so stress is as load divided by area, so your F, the failure stress, will be higher on the basis of actual stress value in comparison to U. So this graph from U to F dash indicates the value based on the actual area of the component. Now from the straight line portion of the graph, we find that stress is proportional to strain. So by having a proportionality constant capital E, which is termed as Young's modulus of elasticity or modulus of elasticity, we can sum up this equation as sigma is equal to E times of epsilons. So this stress being proportional to strain is termed as Hooke's law, and as we know that the stress is equal to load divided by area and strain is equal to deformation divided by the original length, we can use them in this equation 1, and we can find the deformation in the component in terms of applied load, the length of the component, area of the component, and modulus of elasticity of the material of the component. There are certain assumptions involved while getting this equation. Of course, one of them is that proportional limit is not exceeded, so only up to the proportional limit your Hooke's law is valid. The component should be of constant cross section for the observed length. So for that L0 length, the cross section of the component is constant, it is circular. The material must be homogeneous and load must be perfectly applied axially. So these assumptions are involved in deriving this equation 1. Now once we have discussed the stress strain diagram for a ductile material, let's talk about the brittle material. First thing is, what are the brittle materials? So brittle materials are the materials which breaks under tension without appreciable deformation. So basically, if you apply an impact load, they are going to break down, or you apply tension, they are going to break. So they are not unlike ductile material which can be drawn easily into wire by the application of tension. This brittle material will not give that much deformation so that they can be converted into a smaller section, or it can convert it into the wire forms. This is a typical stress strain diagram for brittle material. And what we see here, there are certain characteristics of this stress strain diagram, and we see here that there is no yield point as such here. The proportional point and elastic point are also again one and same. There is no yielding of the component, so there is no appreciable deformation, and the ultimate point stress and the fracture point stress are the same. Now I have summed up here that no necking phenomena will take place. So after sigma u, because there is a fracture of the component, so there will not be actually necking. There is a very low proportional point in comparison to ductile material. There is no well defined yield point here, and ultimate stress and fracture stress are same. So in order to determine the usable stress value for this component, we usually use the concept of a proof stress. So in order to obtain the proof stress, what we do is we draw a 0.2% strain offset, a line parallel to the original line of the stress strain diagram, and we see at which point it is going to cut the curve. From this point we draw a horizontal line and we determine the value of stress, that is the value of the proof stress or 0.2% offset strain. And we usually take this value in order to design the component. In some other cases, we otherwise take the value of sigma u for the purpose of calculation of dimensions of the component while designing. So in case of a ductile material, it is the sigma y which is taken as the strength of the component, and in case of a brittle material, it is either sigma u or proof stress taken as the design criteria for the component. Now there are few more terms we should be familiar with. One of them is the percentage elongation. So in percentage elongation can be obtained by subtracting the original length from the final length of the component. So this is the net deformation that has taken place in the component, and if we divide by the original length of the component and multiply it with 100, we will get the percentage elongation that has taken place in the component. The another very important term here is factor of safety. This term is very much important for the design of the components. We also call it as a factor of uncertainty. While obtaining the permissible strength, or rather the strength values for the component, we have obtained like sigma y for the ductile material. So for that we have taken a specimen of a particular size, while the actual component which is being used in the machine part may be a bigger component, much bigger component in comparison to what we have used in the specimen. So that specimen is perfectly homogeneous, it is very small, and it has no defects because it has been made up of the right material. But while in the actual use the machine component may have certain defects in it, because owing to its large size it may not be of a perfect finish, surface finish as that of the original component. So because of this there are certain uncertainty involved regarding the type of material we are using for the actual machine component, though they may be called in general that they are both made of same mild steel or aluminum, let's say. Now there is a uncertainty involved in terms of load also, because in the tensile test machine we apply the load perfectly axially. This is one of the assumptions we have also made, while in the actual component the load may not be applied perfectly axially. So looking at these uncertainty related to the load and the material, we need to reduce the value of that we obtain from the tensile test machine, so that they can be a perfectly usable values, and they are called as working stress value or permissible stress value. So we reduce them by using a term called factor of safety. Its value is always greater than 1. The more uncertain we are about the material aspect and the loading aspect, higher will be the value of n. This is one criteria. So for a brittle material, we take the sigma u ultimate stress as the design criteria. So sigma u by n will be the working stress or permissible stress in order to derive the component's dimension. For a ductile material, as sigma y, yield stress is the criteria, because after yielding there is a large deformation in the component. So the component remains, though it has not failed up to point sigma f, but it is of no use because it loses its functionality. So sigma y is taken as the criteria for ductile material. So we divide sigma y with the factor of safety in order to obtain the working stress or permissible stress. One more thing I would like to discuss here before going ahead is that the curve under this, the area under the curve of this stress strain diagram shows the energy absorbed. So up to this point, if we look at this area under the curve, this shows the amount of energy absorbed before failure. So you see there is a large area involved in the ductile material case. So it can take up large amount of energy without actually getting failed. While if we take the case of let's say the brittle material, you see this area is significantly lower because there is not much deformation. So the brittle material are not able to take much energy before failure, so they easily break down in comparison to ductile material. Now let's do some numerical problems in order to understand this topic more clearly. Let's take the case of a steel rod like the one which I have shown earlier. It is, let's say that its dimensions are given to us. So we know the diameter of the steel rod, it's 20 millimeter. The length of the steel rod is also given, it is 500 centimeter, and it is subjected to axial pull, let's say of 30 kilonewton. We know the material of the rod, it is steel, so we know the modulus of elasticity value for this particular material, that is 200 giganewton per meter square. Now we need to calculate the intensity of stress strain and elongation of the rod. Now, in order to determine the intensity of stress sigma, you need to divide the load with the area of the component. The load value P is given as 30 kilonewton. So we say it is 30 into 10 to the power 3 newtons. Area is pi by 4 d square because it is a circular one. So pi by 4 into 20 square. Now you will calculate this value in terms of Newton per millimeter square because we have taken the area in millimeter and the load value in Newton. So this gives us the value of 95.49 Newton per meter square. If we convert it into meter, millimeter to meter, we are going to get 10 to the power 6 multiplication with the 95.49. And you can also write it as this Newton per millimeter square as Pascal. Newton per meter square as Pascal and 10 to the power 6 as megapascal. So this is the usual way of representing the stress. We usually define the value of stress in megapascal. So which automatically means whatever may be the numerical value is there, you need to multiply it by 10 to the power 6 and the value is given in Newton per meter square or SI units. So 1 megapascal is equal to 10 to the power 6 Newton per meter square. Very often we will find the value of the components given in millimeter. So you may calculate them initially in Newton per millimeter square, but you must convert it at the later stage in Newton per meter square or megapascal units. You can calculate the value of strain using the Hooke's law. So from the Hooke's law, we know that strain is equal to stress divided by modulus of elasticity. We have been given the value of stress, so we will put here the stress 95.49 into 10 to the power 6, and this value of E is given in giga Newton per meter square. So this is 10 to the power 9, basically 200 into 10 to the power 9 Newton per meter square. So if we calculate it, we'll get the value of strain as shown over here. Mind it, the strain doesn't have any unit, so it is dimensionless quantity. The last thing that we need to calculate is the elongation of rod. In order to calculate the elongation of rod, we have either the formula delta L is equal to P into L divided by A into E. You know the value of load, you know the value of length, you know the value of E, you can calculate the area using the diameter, so you can calculate using this formula. But as we have already calculated the strain over here, we can use the formula of strain in order to calculate the deformation. So deformation is equal to the strain produced multiplied by the original length. So we have the value of strain here, which we have calculated. The length of the component is 500 into 10 to the power minus 2 in terms of meter. So this is the value is given in centimeter, so I have converted it into meter. So the final deformation value that I have calculated will be 0.002387 meter, or you can also get it in millimeter by multiplying it by 1000. So you will be getting a value of 2.387 millimeter. Please note it that we are mostly going to use the SI units, and we need to be consistent. We need to calculate the values of the length in meter, and the load value will always be in newtons here. Now let's see the another numerical here. In this case, we have a bar of mild steel, which is again a circular bar. The diameter of the bar is given to you as 2 centimeter here. We are talking about a tensile test here, and we know the value of loads that is being applied here. So the load value for the yielding is given as 80 kilonewton. This is the point where the bar starts to yield. So this point corresponds to Y value. The maximum load that the load bar can sustain is 150 kilonewton. So this corresponds to U. So this corresponds to Y, this corresponds to point U. And finally, the component breaks at the point 70 kilonewton. So this corresponds to your fracture point F. So there are values corresponding to load values corresponding to Y, U and F points are given. You have been given the diameter of the component. What you need to calculate here is the value of stress is corresponding to these points. So you need to calculate the average tensile stress at yield point, ultimate tensile stress corresponding to U point, and the stress at breaking point. But there is a catch given over here. that the diameter has changed from 2 centimeter to 1 centimeter. As I have told you that the necking take place after ultimate point, so the diameter get locally reduced at certain point along the length of the component. Usually it is at the middle, so that diameter is available to us as 1 centimeter. Now let's start with the calculation. So first thing is that you calculate the area of the component. So that is simply a circular component, pi by 4d square. You calculated the area in centimeter square. Of course we are going to use it and convert it into meter once we are calculating the stresses. So let's calculate the stresses corresponding to yield point. So that is called as sigma y, or yield point stress. So we put the value of load corresponding to yield point, that is 80 kilonewton. So we converted it into Newton, 80 into 10 to the power 3. We have area of the component, original area of the component, which you have just calculated here. We substituted it here. Mind it, I converted it into meter here. So that's why there is a 10 to the power minus 4 appearing in the denominator here. We calculated the value and it turns out to be 254.7 into 10 to the power 6 Newton per meter square. We know 10 to the power 6 Newton per meter square is equal to 1 megapascal. So I write it down as 254.7 megapascal. So the yield point stress of this particular bar will be 254.7 megapascal. Now similarly we have to calculate the value of ultimate point stress. In order to calculate the ultimate point stress of the component, we need to divide the value of load at the ultimate point, that is Pu, which is given here as 150 kilonewton. So it is 150 into 10 to the power 3 with the original area. In the similar fashion, we calculate it as 477.7 megapascal, which is much higher than the value of sigma y we have obtained in the previous calculations. Now the last thing is to calculate the fracture stress value. As in this question you are already given the diameter, the new diameter, because of the necking, that is 1 centimeter. So you need to calculate the area at the time of fracture. So you calculate this as pi by 4d squared, diameter is 1 centimeter, so you get a value of 0.785 centimeter square, and you calculate the fracture point stress by the load value of the at the fracture point with the area at the fracture point. Again, remember that we have multiplied it by 10 to the power minus 4 in order to convert it into meter square. This value we will calculate will turn out to be 891.7 megapascal. You see, this vertical value is far higher than the value of sigma u. If you have remembered the figure, I have drawn that during the tensile test of a ductile material. I have shown you it with a dotted line that f dash point is higher than the u point. So this is what it is indicating. But instead of the fractured area at the time of actual area at the time of fracture, if you take the original area 2 centimeter, your value will obviously be lower than the sigma u, right? So that will be the f point which we are getting in the tensile test diagram, which is below the u point. So this particular point corresponds to sigma f dash. I would prefer to write a dash here because it is the actual stress value at the time of fracture, and we can see that the actual stress value at the time of fracture is higher than in comparison to the value that we take as sigma u. Now let's talk about the other kind of stress that we discussed in our previous lecture also, that is shear stress. I have already shown you this particular example. We know what is shear stress from our last lecture. So when two parts of a body apply a load such that they try to act tangential to the area, resisting area. So this is a rivet which is joining these two parts of the plate, and when we pull this plate in the opposite direction, this rivet tends to fail from the middle, and the area is also shown, which will be pi by 4d square, the diameter of the rivet will be there. So this area is parallel to the applied load. That's why the stresses that are produced in this rivet are termed as shear stress, and the magnitude of these shear stress will be given by applied load Q divided by the area of the rivet. So that's fine, we have already talked about it. Now let's talk about the shear strain. So because in the shear, one plane tend to slide over the another plane in order to cause the failure. So therefore we can see that if we take a part of a small elemental part of this rivet at the juncture of the failure, we can say that this is ABCD. So this will deform in a way that it will convert into from ABCD to ABC dash D dash. So the deformation, angular deformation that is taking place is given by here as phi. So shear strain is basically defined as CC dash divided by BC or MM dash divided by BM, which is nothing but equal to tangent of this angle phi. And for very small phi value, you can say that tangent of phi will be approximately equal to phi, which is nothing but your shear strain. So phi is the shear strain here, and it can be calculated by dividing CC dash with BC. As we have drawn the stress strain diagram in case of a tension, we can also do the similar thing for the shear stresses. We can plot a graph between the shear stress, applied shear stress, and the angular deformation that is taking place, that is phi, and we will find that there will be a straight line portion in that graph also. So tau will be proportional to phi. So this is the straight line portion of that where it will be valid, and we can use the proportionality constant G here, like we have used earlier the modulus of elasticity E. This G will be called as modulus of rigidity. Again, its value will be in Newton per meter square. So analogous to our tensile test, where stress sigma was proportional to strain epsilon, here the tau is proportional to phi, and as sigma was equal to E times of epsilon, here tau will be equal to G times of phi. So G is the property of the component, it is modulus of rigidity. For different material it has a different value, for like aluminum and steel and other materials. So you can get their values from the design data book. Now there is one concept that I would like to tell you here, that is the concept of complementary shear stress. So whenever if a stress is being applied on one plane, a plane perpendicular to it is the similar magnitude of stress will be applied at 90 degree to it. So how we can prove that? So if we take the same ABCD small element, I have right now drawn a cuboid here, and you can see a rectangular parallel pipe is here, and you can see it in 3 dimension here. So when a stress of magnitude tau is being applied here on the two planes of it, this rectangular parallel pipe, the length of it is L, the width is B, and the thickness is T. So these two component of the stresses will cause the forces to be acting on these planes, whose magnitude we can always obtain by multiplying the stress on the area on which it is acting. So like tau multiplied by area of the AB, B, B dash, A dash, what will be that area? That area will be length multiplied by the thickness. So tau into L into T will be the amount of force that will be acting at the bottom of this rectangular parallelepiped. So similarly, there will be another force acting at the top of it, which will be again of tau into L into T. So these two forces will balance each other. The force balance is there, but because they are acting like a couple, they will produce a moment whose magnitude we can find by multiplying the amount of force here, tau into L into T, by the distance B, width B. So tau into L into T into B will be the amount of moment that is being created. You see, this moment is trying to rotate this element in anti-clockwise fashion, while we find that actually this component is not rotating there in the machine part. So there is something counterbalancing moment that is acting on here, which is trying to balance it up. So in order to produce the counterbalancing moment, we should have additional stresses acting on the perpendicular plane, whose magnitude will be given by tau dash. If we calculate the amount of force that this stress will produce, will be the tau dash multiplied by the area on which it is acting. The area on which it is acting is having the dimension of width b and thickness t. So tau dash into t into b will be the amount of force that will be created due to this particular stress, and it will create a moment, that is force into distance at which it is creating. So that will be tau dash into t into b multiplied by the distance l. Now these two moments should be equal in order to have the equilibrium. So I have equated them here, and as LTB will get cancelled out, you will ultimately get tau equal to tau dash. So this shows that when these stresses always occur in pairs, and whenever there is a stress acting on one particular plane, a plane 90 degree to it will also have the same magnitude stress, okay, in case of a shear stress. So that is it from today's lecture. I would ask you to do some numericals from any book that you are having a soft copy with you. So please go through the example numericals, which are based on simple stress strain calculations, and that's it for today's lecture.